as we enter the holiday period, I know there's going to be a lot of people going from inland to the coast for their annual holiday, and a lot of them will be doing a lot of fishing, and I'm sure the number one thing is to catch a few fish. So today I'm going to go through just a few things to help you guys when you get to the coast to catch something. Now, a lot of you will be fishing from the beach, or most will, I guess, fish from the beach. So I'll target beach fishing today. I know there'll be a few doing estuary, a few going deep sea, but the majority will be at least wetting a line at the beach. So here we go. We'll show you a few things to help you get started when you get to the coast. So besides your rods and reels, hooks and sinkers and line, there's a bait bucket, and this I find very important, or for me it's very important, and that is a belt buckle, and that is to actually rest your rod in when the fish are not biting over long periods, but hopefully that won't happen. Then we have, important, a knife, a scaler, scale your fish, a pair of pliers, which is handy for not only catching worms but snipping your line off and many other things. And of course, one of the most important factors is sunscreen, especially this time of the year. You don't want to come out on your first day and get absolutely fried and turn into pretty much a beetroot. This is pretty important. So if you're down for a week, get it on nice and thick in your first couple of days especially. Then we've got something to measure your fish on. Now, this is been made by a mate of mine. It goes up to 36 centimetres, but you can get longer ones. But for most fish like bream and whiting, this will be sufficient. Then of course we've got, most important, a bucket. Put your fish in, put all your gear in when you arrive at the beach, and if you're fishing at night, little headlamp. That's got this one here, focus changes on it, so you get a wide beam and a narrow beam and a couple of different settings. So that'll get you started. Now there's one other thing I'd suggest you get, and that is some conduit. Put it into the sand, push it into the sand like that, put your rod in when there's not much happening, and you can get them from your tackle store. They should have them. That one I've got is just a bit of PVC from the plumbers, but it works well. It's about 35 to 40 mil, I think, in that vicinity. We'll have a look at rods and reels and sinkers, a few different size hooks. The hooks I like to use, pretty much you want to keep it to a minimum, so I'd suggest some long shank whiting hooks, say number 4s to number 6, around that size. Suicide hooks, I would suggest size 2.0, and I'd use that for prawns and maybe worms. Where you're fishing for, say, bream or flathead and that sort of thing that's in the surf, and a number 4 suicide hook. I'd use that for, say, half a pilchard, and you'd pick up bream, salmon tailor, or maybe not tailor, they might bite you off, they've got relatively sharp teeth, flathead, that sort of thing. And also some gang hooks, so I use 4.0 gang hooks, which are 3 hooks linked together, which you would use on a whole pilchard. If there's big tailor around, I'd suggest a wire trace. However, just normal tailor, normal size tailor, just a monofilament line is probably the best. You can use braid line or monofilament. Both have their advantages and disadvantages, which I'll go into later. Alright, there's one more thing which I'd suggest after you've been handling pilchards or smelly fish when you get home, so the rest of the family don't have to put up with the smell. It is a soapstone, which is a stainless steel disc. Basically rub your hands with this and most smells, or pretty much all smells, even onion, will disappear. I used to put a bit of water on there and wash the smell away. So soapstone, your family will love you for it. Okay, the advantages of pliers. You can use them for removing hooks, cutting your line. You can use it for even crimping if you're putting a wire trace on, or catching worms. Hooks. I use long shank whiting hooks this time of the year. Anything from number 4 to number 6. Suicide or circle hooks, a 2-0, which is great for prawns and also worms, and a 4-0, which I use for half a pilchard. If they're big pilchards, maybe a 5-0. So for tying hooks on and swivels and even sinkers, I do pretty much the same knot. So run your line through the eye of the hook, then go round the main line with that tag 5 or 6 times, then run that tag back through the space near the eye of the hook, and then bring it back through the loop you've just made, and then pull your main line, pull it tight and cut off the tag. Here's another knot you can try. So you run the line through the eye of the hook, create a loop on the shaft of the hook, then wrap the tag around 5 or 6 times, run it through the loop near the bend on the hook, then hold on to the tag and then pull your main line to tighten it up. All you need to do then is cut that tag off. Now from the hook I'd have a trace, in most instances about 30 to 40 centimetres long, on which I'd tie a swivel. Now pretty much the most basic rig is you run a ball sinker along your main line, then you'll tie the end of that line to your swivel, which runs down to that trace and to the hook. So there you go, there you have it. With regard to ball sinkers, I'd get a few different sizes. It depends on how much swell there is, how much current, and you just use the appropriate size, and you'll soon work that out. Now, if there's a lot of swell, I'll probably use like a snapper lead, a spoon sinker, just a heavier sinker, or if there's a fair bit of swell, I'd use a star sinker, which will dig into the sand and hold bottom really well. Put that on exactly the same way as I've tied the first hook on. Now from that sinker I'd run a 20 to 30 centimetre trace and tie a swivel on to that, and that swivel will be running freely along the main line. So the main line runs through that swivel, so it runs up and down, so when a fish grabs your bait, they won't feel the weight of that sinker. Now I like to run a bead onto the main line then, before tying that line onto the trace, which runs down to the hook. So it stops that running swivel fouling up on the swivel below. Another rig I use involves using 2 3-way swivels, and I usually use this for whiting when I want to set up 2 hooks. Firstly, I tie my sinker on, which comes up to the bottom swivel, then there's a hook comes off the middle one, like so. Then there's a trace comes up to the next swivel of about 40 centimetres, and then off to the side of that is a short trace in which another hook is placed, and then the main line is tied to the top of that top swivel, and that's about it.
So when there is an abundance of whiting around, you can probably catch 2 at a time.
Now if you're losing lures, or even you decide to go squidding and use a squid jig, they can be tied on like this. So you tie a loop in your main line, run the main line through the front of the lure, then back through that loop, then hold it there, and then go round the main line towards the rod tip 5 or 6 times, like so. Then run that tag back through the loop that's there, back through there, and then back through the loop that you've just formed, and pull the main line tight. And that way you'll have a nice loose connection that's not going to interfere with the action of the lure.
With reels, depending on where you're fishing, you could use a small 1000 reel, like that, which would be used for light fish like bream and whiting, and probably use approximately 4 to 6 pound line on that. It's then just a matter of matching it up with a suitable rod to suit. Or you could use something like this. This is a 2500 reel. Again, you'd pick an appropriate rod, and you'd probably ask your tackle dealer what rod would suit this reel. Again, you'd use possibly up to 10 or 12 pound line on that. Or if you decide to chase something pretty big, you'd need a solid rod for this reel. This is a 6000, and you'd use possibly 20-25 pound line on that, or even possibly 30 if you're fishing
On the ocean rocks.
and you pick up snapper and the likes of kingfish on a reel like this.
So there's basically 3 different types of line you can get. There's braided line, then you've got monofilament, and thirdly fluorocarbon. I like to use different ones for different things. They all have their advantages and disadvantages. For instance, with braid, it has no stretch, so you can feel every little touch of a fish. But if you get it caught in weed and kelp, it can tangle into knots that cannot be removed. And you've got monofilament, which has good stretch in it. It's more forgiving. And then of course you've got fluorocarbon, which I use on a smaller reel, 4 to 6 pound, throwing lures and chasing bream and whiting. When you're fishing from the beach, being able to read that beach is a great asset. The idea is to be able to identify where the fish are likely to be. Now at low tide, I would more than often fish the deeper water. That is where the waves are not breaking. Now the reason the wave breaks is because it's shallow water and it cannot support the energy of the wave anymore. So it actually breaks and forms white water. The basic rule for me is that if I'm fishing at high tide or around the high tide mark, I'd be looking for the area where the waves are breaking. In other words, the shallower water, because the fish are more likely to be up there looking for food when it's being stirred up like that. As the tide runs out, I tend to move towards the gutters or the deeper water, where the water is running off those sandbars into that deeper water as the tide recedes. So that's it in a nutshell. I won't go too much into it. The other place I'd suggest is either end of the beach where there's rocks. There's a good chance that fish will be hanging around there. The water normally gouges out around the rocks, so it's generally a little bit deeper right in adjacent to those rocks. So don't disregard that. It's a good spot where I picked up lots and lots of fish over the years, from whiting, bream, flathead and many others including salmon tailor. There's one other thing I should mention, and that is when there's a lot of kelp and weed and crap around from a recent big swell, just bear in mind that those gutters, or that deeper water, is there for a reason. The water has flushed through there, so there's a lot more water going there, gouging it out. That's why it's actually deep. But the downside is it's often filled with weed. So if you're looking for deeper water to fish and you cast in there, good chance that you're going to hook up on weed if there's a lot of weed around, as opposed to the shallower water where generally there'll be much less weed. So something to bear in mind, especially when you get frustrated hooking up on weed all the time. I guess another thing is when a wave breaks, it breaks in the shallow water, but sometimes there's deeper water inside where it's breaking. In other words, inside that sandbar. The wave will break and then it starts to reform, so the white water starts to dissipate or disappear, and often that is a very good place to find fish because they'll be moving along in that slightly deeper water, the wave's broken, and pushing any food that it may have dislodged back into that deeper water. So certainly keep your eyes open for a wave that's broken, and then it's pretty much reforming.
When it comes to bait, you can use bait that you've bought from the tackle shop, or you may wish to go out and catch some of your own. Firstly, with prawns, I like to use peel prawns on a lot of occasions, especially for the likes of whiting and dart. Or you can use a prawn with the head and shell still on it, and it's simply threaded onto the hook. And you may wish to do a light half hitch around the tail, but not too tight, as it will cut the prawn in half. When using a beach worm, or any worm for that matter, it's just a matter of threading it onto the hook, and you may wish to go up past the eye of the hook. With a whole pilchard, I use 3 ganged hooks, usually 4/0, depending on the size of the pilchard, and I'll just line it up with the top hook with the eye, and then make a mark on the pilchard with the 3rd hook, drive it through the spine if possible, and then put the 2nd hook in, and then your final hook, the top one, through the eye of the pilchard. So that's it. There you have it. There are many times when a half a pilchard actually works better than a full pilchard. So merely cut the pilchard in half at an angle. When using the tail section, just drive the hook through there and then back through the pilchard again, and then just do a half hitch around the tail and you're done. When using the head section, it's just a matter of passing the hook through the eye, bring it right through, and then push the hook through the spine if possible. Pull the line back, and then do again a half hitch around the nose of the pilchard, and that's it. Of course, there are many other baits you could use, but this will get you started. Anyway, good luck during the holiday period, and we'll catch you next time. Bye for now. Thanks for watching.